Today in Cannabis News, a cannabis-related proposal dealing with localities and social equity in Massachusetts passes through a legislative committee. The Ohio Secretary of State verifies that campaigners have gathered sufficient signatures to oblige lawmakers to consider the topic of legalizing cannabis statewide. And the leader of the U.S. Safe Banking Act states that he intends to tie the federal policy reform to a larger package focusing on science and development in the digital and industrial sectors. It's Tuesday, February 1st, and this is your Trichomes Morning Buzz.
Broadcasting live from the Trichomes.com studios in Southern California, it's time for your Morning Buzz. We bring you late-breaking news that keeps you up to date with what's happening in the cannabis industry.
First up, a new bill aiming at remedying situations with local community arrangements and social equity in the Massachusetts statewide cannabis sector received unanimous support from the State House Joint Committee on Cannabis Policy, paving the way for the state legislature to become more involved in cannabis regulation than it has been since reworking the voter-approved cannabis legalization statute 5 years earlier. In a vote count that ended last week, every panel member was in support of moving forward with the proposal, which would tighten limitations on mandatory contract terms among cannabis firms and host communities, create a cannabis social equity trust fund, and set the stage for localities to permit cannabis consumption facilities. Additionally, every panel member that expressed a view on a separate proposal relating to the expungement of cannabis possession crimes voted in favor of moving it forward. The gap between the law's stated commitment to equity and the on-the-ground reality of the industry shows just how much work we have left to do, said Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, co-chair of the Joint Committee on Cannabis Policy. There's universal agreement about the problems. High cost of entry and lack of access to capital create a near-impossible barrier for many talented entrepreneurs. This bill addresses both sides of that coin. I'm thrilled we're finally advancing it.
Next up, the Ohio Secretary of State's office verified recently that campaigners in the state have gathered sufficient signatures to oblige lawmakers to consider the topic of legalizing cannabis statewide. The Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol presented the last wave of signatures for the proposition 2 weeks ago. The official approval of the signatures begins a statutory assessment for the policy reform, but it does not obligate legislators to implement the measure. State lawmakers now have 4 months to review the cannabis reform plan put out by the campaigners. Legislators have the option of passing the proposition as is, rejecting it, or amending it. If the proposition fails, campaigners can gather an extra 132,887 petition signatures from voters in the state to put the matter on the November 2022 ballot. Adults aged 21 years or older would be allowed to carry a maximum of 2.5 ounces of cannabis, as well as a maximum of 15 grams of cannabis extracts, under the proposition that legislators will be obliged to debate. Persons can cultivate a maximum of 6 plants for individual consumption with a domestic limit of 12 plants.
Last up, the leader of a proposal to safeguard financial institutions that engage with state-licensed cannabis companies in the U.S. stated that he intends to tie the federal policy reform to a larger package, focusing on science and development in the digital and industrial sectors. Following the Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act being pulled last year from a different federal defense package, bill sponsor Representative Ed Perlmutter indicated desire in pursuing a different strategy to implement the reform. As of now, Representative Perlmutter's proposal has passed the U.S. House in 5 different iterations, just to be stagnated in the Senate. His most recent effort to implement the federal policy update involves submitting an amendment to the America Competes Act with the safe banking wording, which does not expressly address cannabis concerns as written, but was presented recently in the House. It's unclear if the America Competes Act will serve as a better package for the Cannabis Financial Services proposal over the National Defense Authorization Act, which had the provisions inserted in the House, but were then omitted during bicameral discussions.
That was today's Buzz. Thanks for listening. For more cannabis news and insights from industry professionals and a place to discuss these stories and others, visit trichomes.com.
And be sure to catch up with all of our other cannabis industry-related podcasts like Hash It Out, Tech and Cannabis, or the International Cannabis Conversation, wherever you get your podcasts. For trichomes.com, I'm RJ Baldwin.
And I'm Devin Liao. Have a great day.